One of the biggest political debates of our time is freedom of speech. What are we at liberty to say and think? And in the context of that debate, I've come to Kensington Square to talk to a commentator and journalist about why he thinks now is the right time to visit the works and thoughts of the philosopher who lived here, J.S. Mill. Morning, Toby.
Morning,
Foul
Giles.
morning. But this is Mill's house. Why do you like Mill so much?
Well, J.S. Mill was the first political philosopher I read, aged 17, as part of preparing for my Oxford interview. And I was a punk anarchist at the time, and Mill very clearly articulates these principles which circumscribe the limits of state action. And as a teenage anarchist, I found that really appealing.
That's you as a teenager being educated, but of course Mill's education is very important as well.
Yes, Mill had a very unusual education. He was taught Greek at the age of 3, was reading Plato in the original, aged 10. His father, who homeschooled him, James Mill, was a disciple of Jeremy Bentham's, the founder of utilitarianism. And James Mill also co-founded University College London. And Mill completed his education by attending lectures as a teenager at UCL.
Well, I tell you what, at least that's inside, so let's go there now.
Meanwhile, our in-house expert, Dr. Elizabeth Fraser, says Mill is one hell of a read.
J.S. Mill's theory of freedom is cogent and powerful and readable. He was courageous. He stood up for the rights of women in a hostile environment. He changed himself getting over an unhappy childhood. And here's why he's really important today. He did that by educating himself or re-educating himself. For him, education is absolutely central to life.
So, Toby, you mentioned Jeremy Bentham, and there he is. That really is him, his skeleton at least. They had to remove his head because it was a bit gruesome and put the waxwork on. But he is the founder of utilitarianism. Mill's father is a disciple of his, but J.S. Mill has a sort of crisis about it. Tell me what happens.
At the age of 20, Mill had what he described as a nervous breakdown. He'd had this difficult experience in his childhood of being brought up in a household in which his father and all his father's intellectual companions were completely beholden to this man. And I think, one of the reasons Mill then devoted his life to resisting intellectual oppression in all its forms was because of the intellectually oppressive atmosphere in his childhood home.
So that, of course, is Bentham. Let's go and have a look at J.S. Mill himself. So this is Temple Gardens along the embankment, and it has to be said, you have to have a good look around. There's loads of statues. We take some finding. But there he is, J.S. Mill. And they put up a statue to him, but what is his great claim to fame?
Well, he wrote a number of celebrated essays on subjects like utilitarianism and representative democracy. He was an MP. He was the first MP, I think, to call for votes for women. But his great claim to fame is his essay entitled On Liberty, in which he articulates what's become known as the harm principle, and which has become one of the touchstones of libertarianism. And the principle is that the only justification for restraining an individual, for the state interfering in an individual's life and preventing him from doing something against his will, is to prevent harm to others. Over his own mind and body, the individual should be sovereign.
Mill wasn't just a philosopher, but also an MP, though he wasn't as radical a politician as he was a thinker.
For Mill, politics is just as it is. He accepts the politics of his time, which is striking in someone who is so unconventional and who refuses to be hidebound by the values of his day.
So, Toby, he's a Victorian political thinker. Does he have any relevance to us today?
Well, one of the points that Mill made most forcefully is that democracy and liberty don't always go hand in hand. Indeed, they're often in conflict. And there ought to be certain carefully defined spheres into which the state shouldn't be able to intrude. And part of that sphere should obviously be free speech. And the harm principle is quite useful when it comes to delineating the limits of what the state's powers should be. When it comes to, for instance, whether we should ban page 3 or prohibit the expression of misogynistic points of view on Twitter, we should ask ourselves, will banning and prohibiting that behaviour cause more harm than allowing it? And I think Mill's answer is that yes, in almost every case it is. And I think it's important to remind Parliament of that, particularly now.
Speaking of freedom of speech, I feel free to say thank God it stopped raining.